He rescued a cat from his cruel wife. Then the vet revealed a horrifying secret. The moving truck rumbled to a stop in front of the neat, two-story house on Maple Street. It was a quintessential American home, the kind you'd see in a Norman Rockwell painting. A wide porch with a swing, a well-tended lawn, and a mailbox perched proudly at the curb. The town of Harmony Creek, nestled in the heart of Ohio, was everything Sarah and Michael had dreamed of: quiet, friendly, and far removed from the hectic pace of their city life. Michael, a tall, lanky man with kind eyes and a gentle smile, hopped out of the driver's seat, stretching his arms after the long drive. Sarah, his wife, emerged from the passenger side, her expression a mix of excitement and apprehension. She was a petite woman, impeccably dressed, with a meticulousness that bordered on obsession. Everything in her life had to be perfect, ordered, and in its place. "Well, here we are," Michael said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "Home sweet home." Sarah nodded, her gaze sweeping over the house. "It's nice," she said, her tone slightly hesitant. "It needs a bit of work, though. The paint is peeling, and the garden is a mess." Michael chuckled. "That's what makes it ours, Sarah. We can put our own stamp on it." They had been married for 5 years, a whirlwind romance that had quickly settled into a comfortable, if somewhat predictable, routine. Michael, a software engineer, worked from home, while Sarah, a freelance graphic designer, had the flexibility to set her own hours. They had decided to leave the city for a slower pace of life, hoping to start a family in the near future. As the movers began unloading their furniture, Sarah suggested they take a break. "Let's go get that kitten," she said, a rare smile lighting up her face. The local animal shelter was a small, unassuming building just a few blocks from their new house. They had visited it a week earlier, and Sarah had been surprisingly taken with a small, ginger kitten with bright green eyes. Michael, a lifelong animal lover, had been thrilled. He had always wanted a pet, but Sarah had been hesitant, worried about the mess and responsibility. The kitten, now named Rusty, was curled up in a small cage, looking lost and scared. When Michael reached out to him, he tentatively sniffed his fingers, then let out a soft purr. "He's perfect," Michael whispered, gently scooping the kitten into his arms. Rusty snuggled against his chest, his tiny body trembling. Sarah watched them, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "He's cute," she conceded. "But you'll have to be responsible for him, Michael. I don't want him scratching the furniture or making a mess." Michael nodded eagerly. "Of course, Sarah. I'll take care of everything." The first few days in the new house were a blur of unpacking, organizing, and settling in. Rusty, initially shy, quickly adapted to his new surroundings. He explored every nook and cranny, chasing dust bunnies, batting at curtains, and pouncing on anything that moved. He was a typical kitten, full of energy and mischief. Michael adored him. He spent hours playing with Rusty, teaching him tricks, and showering him with affection. He built him a scratching post, bought him a mountain of toys, and even created a cozy little bed for him in his home office. Sarah, however, was less enthusiastic. She found Rusty's boundless energy irritating. His playful nips and scratches annoyed her. The fur he shed on the furniture drove her to distraction. She constantly shooed him away, scolded him for climbing on things, and complained about the mess he made. "Michael, can't you control him?" she'd snap, her voice tight with frustration. "He's ruining my new rug." Michael would try to calm her down, explaining that Rusty was just a kitten, that he was learning, that he didn't mean any harm. But Sarah's patience was wearing thin. One evening, Rusty, in a fit of playful exuberance, knocked over a vase of flowers that Sarah had carefully arranged on the coffee table. Water spilled everywhere, soaking the rug and staining the wood. Sarah exploded. She grabbed Rusty by the scruff of his neck, hissing, "You stupid cat! Look what you've done!" Rusty let out a terrified yelp, his eyes wide with fear. He struggled to escape her grip, but she held him tight. Michael, who had been working in his office, heard the commotion and rushed into the living room. He saw Sarah holding Rusty, Her face contorted with anger, and his heart sank. "Sarah, let him go!" he shouted. Sarah glared at him, her grip tightening on Rusty. "He needs to learn a lesson," she said through gritted teeth. Michael lunged forward, gently but firmly prying Sarah's fingers from Rusty's neck. The kitten, trembling and whimpering, scrambled out of her grasp and darted under the sofa. "What is wrong with you?" Michael demanded, his voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "You could have hurt him." Sarah stood there, breathing heavily, her hands clenched into fists. "He's a menace, Michael. He's destroying everything. He's a kitten, Sarah. Kittens play, they make messes. It's what they do." "Well, I can't stand it," she shrieked. "I can't stand him." Michael stared at her, a cold dread creeping into his heart. He had never seen her like this before. This wasn't just impatience or frustration. This was something darker, something more disturbing. He knelt down and coaxed Rusty out from under the sofa. The kitten, still shaking, crept into his arms and buried his face in his chest. Michael held him close, stroking his fur, whispering soothing words. He looked up at Sarah, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger, sadness, and a growing fear. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "We need to talk about this." But Sarah just turned and walked away, leaving Michael and Rusty alone in the silent, tension-filled room. The dream of Harmony Creek was already starting to feel like a nightmare. The conversation Michael had hoped for never truly happened. Sarah refused to acknowledge there was a serious problem. She dismissed the incident with the vase as an overreaction, a momentary lapse of judgment brought on by the stress of the move. She promised to be more careful with Rusty, but her underlying resentment remained, simmering just beneath the surface. Michael, however, couldn't shake the image of Sarah's anger, the cruelty in her eyes. He started to watch her more closely, noticing the subtle ways she mistreated Rusty. The harsh tone of her voice when she spoke to him, the way she'd push him away with her foot when he got too close, the way she'd deliberately withhold food or water as a form of punishment. Rusty, in turn, became increasingly wary of Sarah. He learned to avoid her, to stay out of her way, to anticipate her moods. He'd slink along the walls, his body low to the ground, his tail tucked between his legs. He'd flinch at her touch, his ears flattened against his head. The playful, carefree kitten he had been was slowly disappearing, replaced by a creature consumed by fear. Michael tried to compensate for Sarah's behavior. He doubled his efforts to make Rusty feel safe and loved. He played with him even more, bought him even more toys, and made sure he always had plenty of food and water. He let Rusty sleep on his bed, curled up at his feet, a warm, comforting presence in the increasingly tense household. He also tried to talk to Sarah again, approaching the subject gently, cautiously. "Sarah," he'd say, "I'm worried about Rusty. He seems so scared all the time." "He's just a cat, Michael," she'd reply, her voice dismissive. "Cats are naturally skittish." "But he wasn't like this before," Michael would persist. "He used to be so playful, so happy." "Well, he's growing up," Sarah would say, cutting him off. "He's learning his place." Her words, "learning his place," chilled Michael to the bone. He knew what she meant. She meant Rusty was learning to fear her, to obey her, to submit to her will. The arguments between Michael and Sarah became more frequent, more intense. They'd argue about Rusty, about Sarah's behavior, about the growing rift between them. The arguments always ended the same way. Sarah refusing to admit she was doing anything wrong, Michael feeling helpless and frustrated. One afternoon, Michael was working in his office when he heard a loud crash from the kitchen, followed by Rusty's terrified screech. He raced to the kitchen, his heart pounding in his chest. He found Sarah standing over Rusty, her face flushed with anger. A broken plate lay shattered on the floor. Rusty was cowering in a corner, his body trembling. "He jumped on the counter and knocked over my plate," Sarah exclaimed, her voice shrill. "He did it on purpose." Michael examined the scene. The plate had been on the edge of the counter, a precarious position. It was likely that Rusty, in his playful exploration, had accidentally brushed against it. "Sarah, I don't think he did it on purpose," Michael said, trying to keep his voice calm. "It was an accident." "No, it wasn't," Sarah insisted. "He's deliberately trying to provoke me." She bent down and grabbed Rusty roughly, lifting him off the ground. Rusty hissed and spat, trying to wriggle free. "Sarah, stop it," Michael shouted. "You're hurting him." Sarah ignored him. She held Rusty up to her face, her eyes narrowed. "You're a bad cat," she hissed. "A very bad cat." Michael had had enough. He grabbed Sarah's arm, forcing her to release Rusty. The kitten scrambled away, disappearing under the kitchen table. "Don't you ever touch him like that again," Michael yelled, his voice trembling with rage. "Do you understand me?" Sarah stared at him, her eyes wide with shock and anger. "How dare you?" she said, her voice low and menacing. "How dare you speak to me like that? How dare you treat an innocent animal like that?" Michael retorted. "He's done nothing to deserve this. He's my cat," Sarah screamed. "I can do whatever I want with him." Michael's blood ran cold. He realized, with a sickening certainty, that Sarah truly believed that. She believed she had the right to abuse Rusty, simply because he was hers. He looked at her, his heart breaking. He didn't recognize the woman standing before him. The woman he had loved, the woman he had married, had vanished, replaced by this angry, cruel stranger. "No, Sarah," he said quietly. "He's not your cat. He's a living being, and he deserves to be treated with kindness and respect." He turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing alone in the kitchen, amidst the shattered remains of her plate and the shattered remnants of their marriage. He went to find Rusty, to comfort him, to reassure him that he was safe. He knew he had to do something, anything, to protect Rusty from Sarah's escalating cruelty. He just didn't know what. The beautiful home in Harmony Creek had become a prison, and Michael felt like he was trapped, with no way out. The incident with the broken plate marked a turning point. Sarah's abuse of Rusty became more overt, more deliberate, and more frequent. It was no longer just harsh words or neglect. It was physical violence, inflicted with a chilling coldness that terrified Michael. She'd kick Rusty if he got in her way, sometimes sending him tumbling across the room. She'd throw things at him, books, shoes, anything that was within reach. She'd lock him in the dark basement for hours, ignoring his desperate meows. She'd withhold food and water, watching with a cruel satisfaction as he grew weaker and thinner. Michael lived in a constant state of anxiety, never knowing when Sarah would lash out at Rusty. He tried to be there for Rusty as much as possible, to shield him from Sarah's wrath, but he couldn't be there all the time. He had to work, he had to sleep, he had to leave the house occasionally. And every time he left, he worried about what might happen while he was gone. Rusty, for his part, had become a shadow of his former self. He was constantly on edge, jumpy and nervous. He'd flinch at any sudden movement, any loud noise. He spent most of his time hiding under the furniture, in closets, anywhere he felt safe from Sarah. He rarely played anymore. His bright green eyes, once full of life and mischief, were now clouded with fear. Michael tried everything he could think of to stop Sarah. He pleaded with her, reasoned with her, argued with her, threatened her. He even tried to get her to see a therapist, suggesting that she might be struggling with stress or anger management issues. But Sarah refused. She insisted she was fine, that Rusty was the problem, that he was a bad cat who deserved to be punished. Their marriage deteriorated rapidly. They barely spoke to each other anymore, except to argue about Rusty. The house, once filled with the promise of a happy future, was now filled with silence and tension. Michael slept on the couch, unable to bear the thought of sharing a bed with Sarah. He felt like he was living with a stranger, a monster who was capable of unspeakable cruelty. One evening, Michael came home from a grocery shopping trip to find Rusty huddled in a corner of the living room, whimpering. He was limping badly, and his left eye was swollen shut. Michael's heart sank. He knew immediately what had happened. "Sarah!" he yelled, his voice filled with rage and despair. "What did you do?" Sarah emerged from the kitchen, her expression indifferent. "He got in my way," she said, her voice flat. "I accidentally stepped on him." Michael knelt down and gently examined Rusty. The kitten winced in pain as Michael touched his leg. His eye was badly bruised, and he was clearly in agony. "Accidentally," Michael said, his voice trembling. "You deliberately hurt him, Sarah. I know you did." "Don't be ridiculous, Michael," Sarah said, rolling her eyes. "He's just being dramatic." Michael couldn't take it anymore. He scooped Rusty up in his arms, ignoring the kitten's cries of pain. "I'm taking him to the vet," he said, "and I'm not coming back." Sarah laughed, a cold, harsh sound. "Where are you going to go?" she said. "You have nowhere to go." Michael didn't answer. He just walked out the door, carrying Rusty, leaving Sarah and the house behind. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he couldn't stay there any longer. He had to get Rusty away from Sarah before it. Michael drove to the nearest emergency animal clinic, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. Rusty lay curled up on the passenger seat, whimpering softly. Michael kept glancing at him, his heart aching with guilt and anger. He should have done something sooner. He should have protected Rusty better. He had been a silent witness to Sarah's abuse for too long, paralyzed by fear and indecision. The clinic was brightly lit and bustling with activity. Michael carried Rusty inside, explaining the situation to the receptionist, his voice choked with emotion. A vet technician quickly took Rusty to an examination room, promising to do everything they could. Michael sat in the waiting room, his mind racing. He felt numb, overwhelmed by the events of the evening. He couldn't believe how far things had deteriorated. He had loved Sarah, he had trusted her, and now he felt like he didn't even know her. After what seemed like an eternity, the veterinarian, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Evans, came out to talk to him. She explained that Rusty had a fractured leg, a severely bruised eye, and several other minor injuries. He was lucky to be alive. "Mr. Anderson," Dr. Evans said, her voice gentle but firm, "I have to ask you, are you aware of how these injuries occurred?" Michael hesitated. He knew he had to tell the truth, but he was afraid of the consequences. He was afraid of what Sarah might do, afraid of what might happen to him, afraid of what might happen to Rusty. I think my wife did it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Evans nodded, her expression understanding. "Mr. Anderson, I've seen cases like this before," she said. "Animal abuse is often a sign of other problems, and it's rarely an isolated incident. It's important that you understand the seriousness of this situation, both for Rusty's safety and for your own." Michael felt a wave of shame and guilt wash over him. He had known, deep down, that Sarah was capable of this, but he had been in denial. He had tried to convince himself that it wasn't that bad, that she would change, that things would get better. But they hadn't. They had only gotten worse. Dr. Evans gave Michael some information about local animal shelters and domestic violence resources. She encouraged him to report the abuse to the authorities, but she also understood his hesitation. She told him that Rusty would need to stay at the clinic for a few days for observation and treatment. Michael thanked her, feeling a glimmer of hope amidst the despair. He knew he had a long and difficult road ahead of him, but he also knew that he had finally taken the first step towards protecting Rusty and himself. He drove back to the house, his mind made up. He was going to pack a bag, gather some essentials for Rusty, and leave. He didn't know where he was going to go, but he knew he couldn't stay in that house with Sarah any longer. When he arrived, the house was dark and silent. Sarah was nowhere to be found. He went upstairs to their bedroom and started packing a suitcase. He packed some clothes, his laptop, his phone charger, and some important documents. He also packed Rusty's favorite toys, his blanket, and some of his food. As he was packing, he heard a noise downstairs. He froze, listening intently. He heard the sound of footsteps, and then Sarah appeared in the doorway. She looked at him, her eyes narrowed. "Where do you think you're going?" she asked, her voice cold. "I'm leaving, Sarah," Michael said, his voice steady. "I can't stay here anymore." "You can't leave me," Sarah said, her voice rising. "You promised you'd always be there for me." "I promised to love and cherish you, Sarah," Michael said. "But I can't love someone who hurts innocent animals. I can't love someone who is capable of such cruelty." Sarah's face contorted with rage. "You're choosing that stupid cat over me?" she screamed. "I'm choosing to do what's right, Sarah," Michael said. "I'm choosing to protect Rusty. And I'm choosing to protect myself." He zipped up the suitcase and walked towards the door. Sarah stepped in front of him, blocking his way. "You're not going anywhere," she said, her voice menacing. Michael stood his ground. "Get out of my way, Sarah," he said. Sarah lunged at him, grabbing his arm. He pushed her away, and she stumbled backward, falling to the floor. Michael didn't wait to see what she would do next. He grabbed the suitcase and ran out of the house, got into his car, and drove away. He didn't look back. He just drove, as fast as he could, away from Harmony Creek, away from Sarah, away from the life he had once known. He drove until he was exhausted, until he couldn't drive any further. He pulled over to the side of the road and stopped the car. He sat there, in the darkness, his hands shaking, his heart pounding. He was free, but he was also terrified. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he had to keep moving forward, for Rusty's sake. He had to find a safe place for them, a place where they could heal and start over. He had to be strong for both of them. The silent witness had finally found his voice, and he would never be silent again. Michael spent the night in his car, parked in a rest area off the highway. He barely slept, his mind tormented by images of Rusty's injuries and Sarah's rage. He felt a mixture of relief, guilt, and fear. Relief that he had finally escaped, guilt that he hadn't done it sooner, and fear of the unknown future. The next morning, he called the animal clinic to check on Rusty. Dr. Evans told him that Rusty was stable, but still in a lot of pain. She said he would need surgery to repair his fractured leg, and that he would likely have a long recovery ahead of him. Michael felt a pang of sadness, but also a surge of determination. He would do whatever it took to help Rusty heal, both physically and emotionally. He would be there for him every step of the way. He decided to drive to a nearby town, a place he had never been before. He needed to find a place to stay, a job, a way to start over. He needed to create a new life for himself and Rusty, a life free from fear and abuse. He found a small, inexpensive motel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it was clean and safe, and it allowed pets. He checked in, paid for a week, and carried his suitcase and Rusty's belongings inside. The room was small and basic, with a double bed, a small table, and a television. But it was a sanctuary, a place where he could finally breathe. He set Rusty's blanket and toys on the floor, creating a small, cozy space for him. He spent the rest of the day researching online, looking for job openings and apartments. He also looked for information about animal shelters and rescue organizations, hoping to find some support and guidance. He found a local animal shelter that offered counseling and resources for victims of animal abuse. He called them, and they were incredibly helpful. They gave him advice, encouragement, and a sense of community. They made him feel like he wasn't alone. He also found a listing for a small apartment that was within his budget and allowed pets. He called the landlord and scheduled a viewing for the next day. He spent the evening watching television, trying to distract himself from his worries. He felt a deep sense of loneliness, missing the companionship of Rusty. He longed to hold him, to comfort him, to reassure him that everything would be okay. He knew he had a long road ahead of him. He had to deal with the legal ramifications of leaving Sarah. He had to find a stable job. He had to help Rusty recover from his injuries. But he was determined to make it work. He had to. He had to create a better life for himself and Rusty, a life filled with love, safety, and happiness. He had to find solace, not just for himself, but for the ginger cat who had become his only family. The next day, Michael visited Rusty at the animal clinic. He was heartbroken to see him in so much pain. His leg in a cast, his eye still swollen shut. But Rusty recognized him immediately, purring weakly and nuzzling against his hand. Michael sat with Rusty for hours, stroking his fur, whispering soothing words. He told him about the motel room, about the apartment he was going to see, about the new life they were going to build together. He promised Rusty that he would never let anyone hurt him again. He promised him that they would always be together, that they would always be safe. He promised him that they would find happiness again, even after all the pain they had endured. Leaving Rusty at the clinic was one of the hardest things Michael had ever done. But he knew it was for the best. Rusty needed medical care, and Michael needed to find a stable home for them. He went to see the apartment, and it was perfect. It was small, but it had a separate bedroom, a small kitchen, and a living room with a large window that let in plenty of sunlight. It was on the ground floor, with a small patio that would be perfect for Rusty. The landlord, a kind elderly woman named Mrs. Davis, was understanding and compassionate. Michael explained his situation, and she was more than willing to rent the apartment to him. She even offered to help him move in. Michael felt a surge of hope. Things were finally starting to look up. He had found a safe place for himself and Rusty, a place where they could start over, a place where they could heal. He had found a glimmer of solace in the darkness, a ray of hope in the storm. He was still scared, still uncertain, but he was no longer alone. He had Rusty, and he had the support of kind strangers who understood his situation. He had the strength to keep going, to keep fighting, to create a better future for himself and the ginger cat he loved. Michael moved into the apartment a few days later. Mrs. Davis, true to her word, helped him move his few belongings. She even brought over a casserole and some fresh-baked cookies, a gesture of kindness that brought tears to Michael's eyes. He set up the apartment, making sure to create a comfortable and welcoming space for Rusty. He put Rusty's bed in a sunny corner of the living room, along with his toys and scratching post. He filled his food and water bowls, anticipating the day when Rusty could finally come home. He visited Rusty at the clinic every day, spending hours with him, talking to him, reading to him, simply being there for him. Rusty's condition slowly improved. His leg was healing, his eye was getting better, and his spirits were lifting. He started to purr more, to play a little, to show signs of his old mischievous self. Michael also started a new job, working as a software developer for a small company in town. It wasn't his dream job, but it was a steady income, and it allowed him to pay the rent and provide for Rusty. He still had to deal with the legal fallout of leaving Sarah. He received angry phone calls and text messages from her, accusing him of abandoning her, of stealing her cat, of ruining her life. He ignored them, refusing to engage with her. He consulted with a lawyer, who advised him to file for a restraining order against Sarah. He was hesitant at first, afraid of provoking her further, but he knew it was the right thing to do, for his own safety and for Rusty's. The process was emotionally draining, but he persevered. He had to testify in court, recounting the details of Sarah's abuse. It was painful and humiliating, but he knew he had to do it. The judge granted the restraining order, prohibiting Sarah from contacting him or Rusty, or coming within a certain distance of them. It was a small victory, but it gave Michael a sense of relief and security. One evening, about a month after he had left Sarah, Michael received a phone call from Dr. Evans at the animal clinic. "Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice urgent. "I need you to come to the clinic right away. It's about Rusty." Michael's heart leaped into his throat. He raced to the clinic, his mind filled with dread. Had something happened to Rusty? Had Sarah found a way to hurt him again? When he arrived, Dr. Evans met him at the door, her expression grim. "What is it?" Michael asked, his voice trembling. "What's wrong with Rusty?" Dr. Evans led him to a private room. "Mr. Anderson," she said, "I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, but Rusty, he took a turn for the worse. We did everything we could, but he didn't make it." Michael stared at her, his mind unable to process what she was saying. What do you mean?" he stammered. He's dead." Dr. Evans nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Anderson. He developed a complication from the surgery, an infection that spread rapidly. We tried everything, but his little body just couldn't fight it off." Michael felt like the world had dropped out from under him. He collapsed into a chair, his body shaking uncontrollably. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. He couldn't feel anything but a crushing, overwhelming sense of grief. Rusty was gone. The ginger cat he had loved, the cat he had rescued, the cat he had promised to protect, was gone. He had failed him. He had failed to keep him safe. He sat there for a long time, unable to move, unable to speak. Dr. Evans stayed with him, offering comfort and support. She explained that they had done everything they could, that Rusty hadn't suffered, that he had passed away peacefully in his sleep. But Michael couldn't find any comfort in her words. He was consumed by grief, by guilt, by a sense of loss so profound that it felt like a physical pain. He had lost everything. He had lost his wife, his home, his life, and now he had lost Rusty. He had nothing left. He was alone, adrift in a sea of despair. He didn't know how he would go on. He didn't know how he would survive this. He had reached the breaking point, the point where the pain was too much to bear. He had lost the one thing that had given him hope, the one thing that had kept him going. He had lost his best friend, his companion, his family. He had lost Rusty. Michael stayed at the clinic for hours, unable to tear himself away from Rusty's lifeless body. He held him, stroked his fur, whispered his apologies and his love. He cried until he had no tears left, his body racked with sobs. Dr. Evans eventually gently suggested that he go home, get some rest. She promised to take care of Rusty, to make arrangements for his cremation. She gave Michael a small box containing Rusty's collar, his favorite toy, and a lock of his fur. Michael clutched the box to his chest, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. It was all he had left of Rusty, a tangible reminder of the bond they had shared. He drove back to the apartment in a daze, his mind numb with grief. The apartment, once a symbol of hope and a new beginning, now felt empty and desolate. He walked inside, and the silence was deafening. He placed the box on the table, and then he collapsed onto the sofa, his body curling into a fetal position. He lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying every memory he had of Rusty, from the moment he had first seen him at the shelter to the last time he had held him at the clinic. He remembered Rusty's playful energy, his mischievous antics, his soft purrs, his bright green eyes. He remembered the way he would follow him around the house, the way he would curl up on his lap while he worked, the way he would greet him at the door with a happy meow. He remembered the fear in Rusty's eyes when Sarah was around, the way he would cower and hide, the way he would flinch at her touch. He remembered the guilt he had felt for not protecting him sooner, for not seeing the signs of abuse, for not being strong enough to stand up to Sarah. He remembered the hope he had felt when they had finally escaped, the dream of a new life together, a life free from fear and pain. He remembered the joy he had felt when Rusty had started to heal, when he had started to show signs of his old self. And now all that was gone. All that was left was emptiness, despair, and a crushing sense of loss. The next few days were a blur. Michael went through the motions of life, but he felt like he was living in a dream, a nightmare from which he couldn't wake up. He went to work, he ate, he slept, but he felt nothing. He was numb, disconnected from the world around him. He avoided Mrs. Davis, unable to face her kindness and sympathy. He couldn't bear to tell her what had happened, to see the sadness in her eyes. He spent most of his time alone in the apartment, surrounded by Rusty's belongings. He would sit on the floor, holding Rusty's blanket, breathing in his scent, trying to imagine that he was still there. One afternoon, Dr. Evans called him. She said she had something important to tell him, something she had discovered during Rusty's necropsy. Michael felt a flicker of something, a spark of curiosity amidst the darkness. He agreed to meet her at the clinic. When he arrived, Dr. Evans led him to her office. She sat him down and closed the door. "Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice serious, "I have some news about Rusty's death. It wasn't just a complication from the surgery." Michael looked at her, his heart pounding. "What do you mean?" he asked. Dr. Evans took a deep breath. "During the necropsy," she said, "I found evidence of further abuse, injuries that were not consistent with the accident you described." Michael stared at her, his mind reeling. "What kind of injuries?" Michael asked, his voice barely a whisper. Dr. Evans hesitated, then said, "There were internal injuries, Mr. Anderson. Significant internal injuries. Ruptured organs, internal bleeding. Injuries that could only have been caused by blunt force trauma." Michael felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He couldn't breathe, he couldn't think. Are you saying someone did this to him?" Dr. Evans nodded slowly. "I believe so, Mr. Anderson. I believe someone deliberately inflicted these injuries on Rusty, and that these injuries were the ultimate cause of his death." Michael's mind raced. He thought of Sarah, of her anger, her cruelty, her obsession with control. He thought of the restraining order, of her threats, of her hatred for Rusty. "Sarah?" he whispered, his voice filled with horror and disbelief. "She did this. She killed him." Dr. Evans looked at him with compassion. "Mr. Anderson, I can't say for sure who did this," she said, "but I strongly suspect that your wife was involved. The nature of the injuries, the timing of Rusty's death, it all points to deliberate, malicious abuse." Michael felt a rage unlike anything he had ever experienced before. A burning, consuming rage that threatened to overwhelm him. He wanted to scream, to lash out, to destroy everything in his path. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. "I have to report this," he said, his voice shaking. "I have to tell the police." Dr. Evans nodded. "I've already contacted them, Mr. Anderson," she said. "I've given them my report, and they're investigating. They'll likely want to speak with you." Michael felt a sense of grim satisfaction. Sarah would finally be held accountable for her actions. She would finally face the consequences of her cruelty. But even that didn't bring him any real comfort. Justice for Rusty wouldn't bring him back. It wouldn't erase the pain, the grief, the overwhelming sense of loss. Dr. Evans stood up and put a hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Anderson," she said, "I know this is incredibly difficult, but you need to be strong. You need to be strong for Rusty, and you need to be strong for yourself. You need to seek justice, and you need to find a way to heal." Michael looked at her, his eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I don't know how to go on without him." Dr. Evans smiled sadly. "You will, Mr. Anderson," she said. "You're stronger than you think, and you're not alone. There are people who care about you, people who want to help you. You just need to let them." Michael nodded, his heart heavy with grief. He knew she was right. He had to find a way to move forward, to honor Rusty's memory, to find some semblance of peace. He thanked Dr. Evans for everything she had done, for her kindness, her compassion, her unwavering support. He left the clinic, feeling a mixture of rage, grief, and a flicker of determination. He would get justice for Rusty. He would make sure Sarah paid for what she had done. And then, somehow, he would find a way to heal, to rebuild his life, to find a way to live with the pain of his loss. He would never forget Rusty. He would always cherish the memory of the ginger cat who had stolen his heart, the cat who had taught him the true meaning of love, loyalty, and resilience. He would carry Rusty's memory with him always, and he would honor that memory by living a life worthy of the love they had shared. The veterinarian's revelation had been a devastating blow, but it had also ignited a fire within him, a fire of determination to seek justice and to find a way to heal. The police investigation into Rusty's death proceeded swiftly. Michael provided them with all the information he had. His testimony, Dr. Evans's report, the restraining order against Sarah, and the threatening messages she had sent him. The police interviewed Sarah, who vehemently denied any involvement in Rusty's death. She claimed it was an accident, that Rusty had been sick, that Michael was lying to get revenge on her. But the evidence was overwhelming. The medical examiner's report confirmed Dr. Evans's findings. Rusty had died from blunt force trauma, injuries that were inconsistent with an accidental injury. Sarah was arrested and charged with animal cruelty, a felony offense. The news of her arrest made headlines in the local newspaper, and Michael found himself thrust into the unwelcome spotlight. He received messages of support from friends, family, and even strangers who had been touched by Rusty's story. But he also received messages of hate from Sarah's supporters, accusing him of lying, of manipulating the situation, of destroying Sarah's life. Michael ignored the negativity, focusing on the task at hand, ensuring that Sarah was brought to justice. He cooperated fully with the police and the prosecutor, providing them with any information they needed. The legal process was slow and arduous, but Michael persevered. He attended every court hearing, sitting in the gallery, watching Sarah, his heart filled with a mixture of anger, sadness, and a strange sense of detachment. He saw the fear in her eyes, the defiance, the desperation. He saw the cracks in her facade, the cracks that had always been there, but that he had been too blind to see. He realized that he had never really known her, that he had fallen in love with an illusion, a projection of his own desires and needs. He had created a narrative in his mind, a story of a happy marriage, a loving partnership, a shared future. But the reality had been far different. The reality had been a nightmare of abuse, cruelty, and betrayal. The trial was a grueling ordeal. Michael had to testify, recounting the details of Sarah's abuse, reliving the trauma he had endured. He had to face Sarah's lawyer, who tried to discredit him, to paint him as a liar, a manipulator, a vengeful ex-husband. But Michael stood his ground. He told the truth, calmly and clearly, his voice unwavering. He presented the evidence, the medical reports, the restraining order, the threatening messages. The jury deliberated for several hours. Michael waited, his heart pounding, his stomach in knots. He didn't know what to expect. He had faith in the justice system, but he also knew that anything was possible. Finally, the jury returned with a verdict. Guilty. Michael felt a wave of relief wash over him, followed by a profound sense of sadness. He had won, but there were no winners in this case. Rusty was still gone, and nothing could bring him back. Sarah was sentenced to several years in prison, a sentence that Michael felt was just, but also inadequate. No amount of punishment could ever compensate for the loss of Rusty, for the pain and suffering he had endured. After the trial, Michael felt a sense of closure, but also a sense of emptiness. He had achieved justice for Rusty, but he still had to deal with the aftermath, with the emotional scars that Sarah's abuse had left behind. He continued to work at his job, to pay his bills, to go through the motions of life. But he felt like a ghost, a shadow of his former self. He had lost his joy, his passion, his sense of purpose. He realized that he couldn't stay in the apartment, surrounded by memories of Rusty. He needed a fresh start, a new environment, a place where he could begin to heal. He decided to move again, to leave the town, to leave the state, to start over somewhere completely new. He didn't know where he would go, but he knew he had to leave. He gave notice to his landlord, Mrs. Davis, who was saddened but understanding. She had become a friend, a source of comfort and support, and he would miss her dearly. He packed his few belongings, the same suitcase he had used when he had fled Sarah's house. He carefully packed the box containing Rusty's collar, his toy, and his fur. It was the only thing he had left of him, and he would cherish it forever. He looked around the empty apartment, his heart aching. He had hoped to build a life here with Rusty, a life of peace and happiness. But that dream had been shattered, destroyed by Sarah's cruelty. He closed the door behind him, leaving the apartment, leaving the town, leaving the past behind. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he had to keep moving forward. He had to find a way to heal, to rebuild his life, to find some semblance of happiness again. He had made a difficult decision, the decision to leave everything behind, to start over, to seek a new beginning. It was a daunting task, but he knew it was necessary. He had to find a way to move on, to honor Rusty's memory, to live a life worthy of the love they had shared. He had to find a way to heal, to find peace, to find himself again. The difficult decision was made, and now he had to face the unknown, with courage, resilience, and the enduring memory of the ginger cat who had changed his life forever. Michael decided to move to the West Coast, to a small coastal town in Oregon. He had always been drawn to the ocean, to its vastness, its power, its calming influence. He hoped that the change of scenery, the fresh air, the slower pace of life would help him heal. He found a small cottage for rent, just a few blocks from the beach. It was old and rustic, with weathered shingles and a small garden. It wasn't perfect, but it felt right. It felt like a place where he could start over, a place where he could find peace. He drove across the country, a long and solitary journey. He listened to music, he thought. He reflected on his life, on his mistakes, on his losses, on his hopes for the future. He stopped at scenic overlooks. He hiked in national parks. He watched the sun rise and set over the vast landscapes. He began to feel a sense of calm, a sense of perspective, a sense of connection to something larger than himself. He arrived in the Oregon coastal town on a cool, misty evening. The air was crisp and clean, scented with salt and pine. He drove to the cottage, his heart filled with a mixture of apprehension and excitement. The cottage was even more charming than he had imagined. It had a cozy living room with a fireplace, a small kitchen, a bedroom with a view of the ocean, and a small, overgrown garden. He unpacked his few belongings, placing Rusty's box on the mantelpiece above the fireplace. He lit a fire, and the room filled with a warm, comforting glow. He sat on the sofa, staring into the flames, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. He was still grieving for Rusty, but the pain was less acute, less overwhelming. He was beginning to heal. The next few weeks were spent settling in, exploring the town, and getting to know his neighbors. He found a job as a freelance software developer, working from home, which gave him the flexibility he needed. He spent his days working, walking on the beach, reading, and tending to the small garden. He started to grow flowers and vegetables, finding solace in the simple act of nurturing life. He met some of the local residents, a mix of artists, fishermen, retirees, and young families. They were friendly and welcoming, and he slowly began to build a new community. He joined a local hiking group, and he started to explore the trails that wound through the forests and along the coastline. He found a sense of peace and connection in nature, a sense of belonging. He still thought about Rusty every day, but the memories were no longer solely filled with pain and sadness. He started to remember the happy times, the playful moments, the unconditional love they had shared. He realized that Rusty's legacy wasn't just one of suffering and loss. It was also a legacy of love, resilience, and the enduring power of the human-animal bond. He decided to volunteer at the local animal shelter, hoping to give back, to help other animals in need. He spent his weekends cleaning cages, walking dogs, playing with cats, and providing comfort and care to the animals who had been abandoned, neglected, or abused. He found a sense of purpose in this work, a sense of healing. He was helping other animals, and in doing so, he was helping himself. He still missed Rusty terribly, and he knew that he would always grieve for him. But he was no longer consumed by grief. He was learning to live with the pain, to integrate it into his life, to allow it to shape him but not define him. He was starting to rebuild his life, to create a new beginning, to find a sense of peace and happiness again. He was learning to live in the present, to appreciate the small joys, to be grateful for the simple things. He was finding his way back to himself, to the person he had been before Sarah, before the abuse, before the trauma. He was rediscovering his strength, his resilience, his capacity for love and compassion. He was starting over, in a new place with new people with new experiences. But he was also carrying with him the lessons he had learned, the memories he had cherished, and the love that would always endure. He was building a new life, a life that honored Rusty's memory, a life that was filled with hope, healing, and the promise of a brighter future. The new beginning was underway, and Michael was finally finding his way back to the light. Years passed. Michael settled into his new life in the Oregon coastal town. He became an integral part of the community, known for his kindness, his generosity, and his love for animals. He continued to volunteer at the animal shelter, eventually becoming a board member. He helped to raise funds to improve the facilities and to advocate for animal welfare. He adopted another cat, a small, black kitten he named Shadow. Shadow was nothing like Rusty, but he brought a new kind of joy into Michael's life. He was playful, affectionate, and a constant source of amusement. Michael never forgot Rusty, of course. He kept his box on the mantelpiece, a constant reminder of the love they had shared. He often talked to Rusty, telling him about his day, about his life, about his hopes and dreams. He found a sense of peace in the ritual, a sense of connection to the cat he had lost. He knew that Rusty was gone, but he also knew that he would always be a part of him. He continued to work as a freelance software developer, enjoying the flexibility and the challenge. He became successful in his field, earning a good living and building a reputation for excellence. He made new friends, close friends, people he could trust, people who cared about him. He even started dating again, cautiously at first, but then with more confidence and openness. He met a woman named Emily, a local artist who shared his love for animals and for the outdoors. They fell in love, slowly and gently, building a relationship based on mutual respect, trust, and affection. They eventually got married, in a small ceremony on the beach, surrounded by their friends and family. It was a simple, beautiful wedding, filled with love, laughter, and a sense of hope. Michael and Emily built a life together, a life filled with love, companionship, and shared passions. They adopted more animals, creating a home filled with warmth and laughter. They traveled, they explored, they lived life to the fullest. They supported each other, they challenged each other, they helped each other grow. Michael finally found the happiness he had been searching for, the happiness that had been stolen from him by Sarah's cruelty. He had healed, he had overcome, he had found his way back to the light. He never forgot the past, but he no longer let it define him. He had learned from his experiences, he had grown from his pain, he had become a stronger, more compassionate, more resilient person. He had honored Rusty's memory by living a life worthy of the love they had shared. He had dedicated his life to helping other animals, to advocating for their welfare, to making the world a better place for them. He had found peace, he had found love, he had found happiness. He had created a life that was full, meaningful, and deeply satisfying. One evening, as he sat on the porch with Emily, watching the sunset over the ocean, he thought about Rusty. He imagined him running free, chasing butterflies, basking in the sun, finally at peace. He smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. He knew that Rusty was with him always. He knew that the love they had shared would endure forever. He looked at Emily, her face illuminated by the golden light of the setting sun. He felt a surge of gratitude, of love, of profound happiness. He had come a long way. He had survived, he had healed, he had thrived. He had found his way back to himself, and he had found a life that was even better than he could have ever imagined. The story ends, not with sadness or loss, but with hope and healing. It is a story of resilience, of the enduring power of love, of the transformative potential of compassion. It is a story of a man who lost everything, but who found his way back, stronger and more whole than ever before. It is a story of a ginger cat named Rusty, whose memory lived on, inspiring a life of love, service, and enduring hope. The healing was complete, and the hope was eternal.